Hello, everybody. Drasko here from 10knorm.com, where my main mission is to help part-time entrepreneurs who know all the business strategies normalize their next business milestone by mastering what's between their ears. And for today's episode, we have a real talk segment where I bring in a heart-centered entrepreneur who isn't seeing the consistent, stable growth in their business. And then live on the call, I get to help them break down one specific aspect most overlooked in business strategy, which is that of the inner aspect. And today's guest, we have Fiona Tate, who owns the Depression Muse, and she is on a mission to reduce the global suicide rate to zero by celebrating people's differences rather than attacking them. She believes that recovery from depression is a ridiculous idea and that using it as a muse to create something beautiful is much more realistic. So Fiona, thank you very much for coming on. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So I'd love to dive into this whole idea of the Depression Muse. I mean, it's definitely not something that I've heard of it. I think I know what you mean it, but I'd rather it come from the source and you describe what you mean by it.
Okay. So the Depression Muse is taking long-standing depression and turning it into something else, using it as a muse to create art, to create beauty, to create something inspiring, a legacy for the rest of the world. So when I talk about art or beauty, that can be anything. That can be things like, for me, myself, it's writing. For other people, it's art. For other people, it's cooking a meal for their family. It's basically taking the emotions, the angst, the thought process, all that stuff that goes into depression and using it instead of trying to recover from it, which of course is the medical standard. In my opinion, when you have long-standing depression, you know, when you've had it longer than a few years, it's not going to magically disappear. It just doesn't work like that. So it's a much better way to manage it. And that's where the Depression Muse uses it specifically to turn it into something amazing. Beautiful. Because it is an amazing thing. As unpleasant as it is a gift.
I mean, listen, this is something we can dive into quite a bit because I've my main resistance point, or the way that I've historically dealt with things, is to move into depression type states, like whether it's full-on depression or depression type states, out of the fight, fright, flee, or freeze, freeze was always my main go-to, right? And it was just always a question of, to what degree do I take that into full-on, I'm kind of getting up depression, or just a mood that isn't all airy and fairy. So yeah, it's something very close to my heart. So I'd love for you to dive deeper into what was your experience with this? How did you get into developing this concept? Just kind of shed some light on that.
Okay, well, for me, I've had depression since childhood. Back when I was a child, it wasn't recognized that children had depression, of course. I'm 52 now, so things have moved on a little bit more. What we know now is that things like phantom stomach pains that you can't find, a real reason for, those kind of things can be symptoms of depression. And I certainly went through an experience after that. I also had the three major factors that can lead into clinical depression is loss of a parent when young, childhood abuse, and genes, and I've got all three. So I'm a boring textbook case, really, and I started at childhood. So of course I grew up and I did all those self-destructive things that you do, the drinking and the horrendous taste of men, all that self-sabotaging stuff. Did all that until I got to a point where I was actually kind of fell into a job in the mental health area, working with people who were experiencing severe mental illness, not just depression, but severe mental illness. And that kind of changed things around for me. That was when I started to heal, I guess, for want of a better word. So I you know, I had bouts on and off, been on medication. I've tried all the treatments. I've done, you know, the therapy, the medication, all of it. It wasn't until a few years ago I had to face the fact that I would never be a mother, and that just wasn't going to happen for me. So that was quite a traumatic time for me. And at that point, I had to make a very conscious decision as to what I was going to do next. Do I finally give in and just let the depression have me? Or do I find a way to live with this, basically? So what I started doing was thinking, okay, so what would I tell my clients if I was going to do this? And that was write out your feelings. Now, when I say write out your feelings, people have been told that, you know, if you have clinical depression, you're told that constantly. And for some people, writing just isn't it. It's not what they do. But there is an outlet. There is an outlet, whether it's, you know, sitting outside in nature, whether it's art, writing, whatever. So I made that conscious decision. And in my case, I was going to write. I wasn't able to write about my feelings about being childless by circumstance. I just couldn't do it. I wasn't there. So I ended up writing a vampire novel, which gave me an outlet. I mean, there's something really juicy in writing, you know, very gruesome, horrible death scenes. There's something really therapeutic in that. And once I got through, I'm on about halfway through my second draft now. And once I got to that point, I realized, you know, this has worked for me. This has kept me sane. It's actually given me a reason to get out of bed, which I didn't have before. And if it's worked for me, then it's going to work for other people. And that was where the Depression Muse started, really. Yeah, so it started, it kind of evolved from there. The first thing I did was I wrote a course specifically for women who are childless by circumstance. And then it's evolved back into specifically for people with depression. Various times over the years, I've thought, you know, maybe I'll stop working with people with depression and I'll try and do something else. I always come back to this. It's basically who I am, and it's what I do. So did that answer the question, or did I wander off a bit?
No, it's beautiful. Like that's always the best thing, where it does go in the direction that it wants to go. And yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, okay, I'll just reflect back to you kind of what, you know, I heard and what was coming up for me, which was, you know, the sentiment of embracing the flavors of life in the spectrum of being human that so often we try to neglect and push aside, right? Like a big part of being human is having the broad spectrum of the emotions that we can have, of which depression is certainly one. And to go into that space, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is just how I heard it, like you stumbled into go into that space with no judgment, because you just went in to write a novel, but then you realized that in that like brooding darkness, or however you want to describe it, you could find like creative outlet, you can find beauty, you can find a way to alchemize it and transmute it, right? And I think so often we push that aside, even like culturally, like we don't want to look at things that are dark, we don't want to talk about death, we don't want to talk about the darkness of the psyche, of which many good things can come up. Like without, you know, things dying and decomposing, we couldn't have life. Like that's just a fact of life, but we oftentimes neglected. So while you were speaking, like I was just thinking in terms of like how much great art has come out of, you know, like just if you look through the history of like rock music, like how much of it, like the whole grunge era came out of that whole state from an area where, you know, like Seattle was pretty brooding place as far as like the actual environment is concerned. So it's like, but how much like that defined a generation as far as like the musical culture was concerned. So That's just the, it's my own aside. Like that's kind of what's coming up for me. So I'd love
Mm.
for you to comment on if that's how you feel, if there's something to add to that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's two things that kind of spring to mind with that. I mean, absolutely, a lot of inspiring people and people I'm inspired by have done specifically that. They have turned their depression into art. Peter Steele is a big favorite of mine for many reasons, and that's one of them. Carrie Fisher's another one who's used her mental illness to create absolutely amazing things. And the thing with depression is we often think, I mean, depression is an illness, and we often speak of I'm depressed as a mood. And the mood is a symptom of that illness. But along with depression, there's other things that comes. It comes things like not being able to make a decision. Things like your memory's shot. You can't remember what you did 5 minutes ago. All those kind of things come into it as well. So it's not, that makes it more, I think, more difficult to manage because your brain isn't actually working. It's not working properly. So it's very difficult to fix something when you don't have the mental faculties to fix it. But at the same time, nothing is like that all the time. And this, I think, is specifically what some people like. For example, Peter Steele understood, is that you make the most of the times when it's not that hard, when it's just a little less difficult. Make the most of those times. Because there is a certain amount of, and this is where I see depression as a gift, there's a certain amount of things that people with depression understand that other people don't. And I'll also say that the other people is becoming a smaller group. There is more and more people with some form of depression than not nowadays. But there's something we know, and I'm not sure if I can explain exactly what that is. I certainly think a part of it is a more of a tolerance for ourselves and for other people, because we're just a little bit more aware that, you know what, things are tough for everybody and we don't know what's going on. And I think the thing is, particularly with these people that just kind of instinctively use the depression and turn it into something, is that they're still in touch. Some part of them is still in touch with their being before they got depression. I mean, one of the things that my work does is it takes you back to a time, and it's usually childhood, not always, but it is usually childhood, where you weren't bogged down and you weren't bothered by this stuff. And you go back to what you loved then, because a child's absolute glee in something. For me, it was writing and writing lists, and specifically, I've always just done that because there's all stories always been in my head. For the likes of these musicians and artists, that spark has always been there. Yeah, it's a very complicated thing, but it's a very simple thing as well. It's just a remembering. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does, because I think the implications, the consequences of it are complicated because they span like your whole life, right? Like it colors every aspect of what you do and where you are and how you interact. But yes, I agree with you. In the span of my own experience of like getting out of it, it is relatively simple, right? So I think it's just the complexity of the complications that get in the way, but the actual process of getting out of it is relatively simple. And one final piece that I would just want to kind of throw your way is one of the pieces that helped me when I started making like real strides to like not be in those states where like all I can do is the bare minimum of every single day. The realization that like I don't get depressed, I focus into depression. Like that was one thing that helped me. So I'm just kind of curious, does that coincide with your experience, or like you're like, no, not really? Like I'm just kind of curious what your take on.
Yes and no. Yeah, yes and no. one of the things in myself, as I kind of, grew and learned about the depression and everything, was I thought that I had it all sorted. I knew all my triggers, I knew all my symptoms, I knew what to do. And then I had one episode of depression that was like the complete opposite of everything else. It was, everything was going well for me. I was feeling great. I was hopeful about my future. And then bang, woke up one morning and I'm depressed. I can't get out of bed. I'm crying. I'm just all over the place. It was dreadful. So I think that it can be both. It can be both. And I think this is the trickiest part of depression, is that we can make, all the plans and, learn all our triggers, do all the work, do everything right, and we can still get hit by it, because that's just the way it works sometimes. We also have, I think, if you have a tendency towards depression, there also comes a point where, if you are able, where you have to make that decision. You have to say, okay, do I snap out of this, or do I just give in? And yeah, that's that can happen as well. There's no black and white. This is the problem with anything that really stresses you out that much, isn't it? There's no black and white rules. You can't say, okay, 2 + 2 = 4, because if you have depression, 2 + 2 could equal 286. It's tricky. And that's why I think suicide is particularly tricky to deal with. For myself, when I have been, I have never been actively suicidal. I do the passive suicidal thing. I just don't want to wake up in the morning, or I'll walked out in front of a bus one day by accident, those kind of things. But I'm also aware that if I'm going to get really kind of, let's just die, it's not when I'm in the depths of despair. It's when I'm feeling slightly better. Because when I'm that bad, I can't make decisions like that. I can't decide how to do it, when to do it. It's just, the brain just will not do it. But when I get slightly better and I'm still ill, and still very ill, I'm well enough to think, oh God, I don't want to feel like that ever again. I must make that stop. There's just so many elements to it, which makes it so devastating. I call it the demon depression, because that's what it is. And I'm quite fond of demons, really. So I'm kind of depression and I are old frenemies at this stage.
Yeah, you guys have been there, done that in many different aspects. So yeah, I totally get it. So fair enough. So then in that case, well, thank you for sharing such a deep spectrum of your experience with this, because yes, as we kind of started this whole conversation with, it's something that's not talked about, yet everybody kind of experiences it, so it's where on that spectrum are you is more of a question versus have you ever, we all have. It's just how deep on that spectrum you have, right?
Exactly.
So
yep,
in
exactly.
that case, what I'm curious about is, okay, so you have this deep lived knowledge and experience of this condition. You obviously have clients that you help through this and with the Depression Muse. So what I'm curious about then is to just shift focus a little bit, look at more, okay, so what is your business then as far as the Depression Muse, and what's the next level that you want to go to that you feel like right now you're unable to do?
Okay, so I have a few different products, for want of a better word. I prefer the word offerings. And the specific thing that I'm really excited about at the moment and want to get moving is called Depression Banishing by Tarot. So I work with the tarot cards as well, and I'm using the tarot cards as a tool to help manage depression. So one of the programs that the main program that I'm getting started at the moment is an in-depth analysis of tarot cards. It's a program, one tarot card a week. We delve into the imagery around the tarot cards, how it can affect your depression, how you manage that depression. So that's it in a nutshell. It is, of course, quite a bit more complicated about that, but that's in it in a nutshell. So my focus, so that's what I'm getting out there at the moment. The issue that I'm having with the most really is reaching the right people. Now, there are plenty of people out there that I could give this program to for free who would make amazing, astounding, steps in their lives, and it would just be so profound for them, because it's I'm good at what I do. This is me. It's who I am. But it's reaching the people that will actually pay money for it. And I find this interesting, because we'll spend thousands of dollars on traditional therapists, medication, all those kind of things that just keep us on an even keel if we're lucky. They don't actually prove anything. They don't actually change anything. They just deal with the immediate symptoms. Some people, for some reason, people seem to be reluctant to pay for something else. And to my mind, that means that I'm not getting my message out there as well as I could be. Again, did that answer the question, or did I wander off again?
Well, I think it's starting to go down the road of the question. So here's where I would ask some clarifying bits. So what you're really alluding to is, in some ways, like a messaging or a marketing problem, right? Like, I know I have this thing that's really valuable, but the people that seem to need it just don't seem to resonate with it. Is that accurate, first and foremost?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of that problem of like, how do I matter to the people that need me most? Right? Like that.
Well, actually, no, I think it's a wee bit more nuanced than that. I think they resonate with it. It's specifically paying the money for it. And I mean, I'm wondering if I'm reaching people who just don't have the income to be able to pay for it. In which case there's a disconnect there, isn't there?
That would definitely be a disconnect, yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I'm a bit kind of lost. I mean, generally, I guess I'm not, in a nutshell, I'm not reaching the right people.
Okay. So what do you, like, you knowing yourself, what do you think the disconnect is?
I think the disconnect. Ooh, I think the disconnect is that I am wanting to help people like me. I'm wanting to help when I was in the position where I couldn't afford the help that I wanted, and that I needed. I want to help those people.
So your thought process going into this is, I want to help the people like me where I was at when I couldn't afford help.
Yeah.
Which seems to be the exact result that you're getting right now.
Exactly.
So you're actually getting exactly what you want.
So that's right. I'm doing well, aren't I? I'm doing exactly what I want.
100% hit rate, on that one. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, I'm also, there's no, that's in a nutshell, I think, really. Whereas I know in my head that I can help those people when I'm making an income. When I'm making an income, I can help more of those people than I certainly can now. But yeah, my head just doesn't want to see the middle ground of that.
That then is an important awareness point, because it's like, okay, so I'm trying to help people who are in the depths of this, like me, that probably can't, like, when I was at a point that I couldn't afford it, but I knew I needed this. But here's the distinction. You, as you now, know that previous you needed it, but that previous you didn't know that she needed it because she never took it. That's why it took you however long it took you to get to this point, right? Like, you're taking your current standards, your current knowledge, your current awareness, your current consciousness, you're projecting it onto the you of before. Like, you've created a story, like that person needed what I know now, without realizing that that person couldn't be you now without going through the experience they need to go to get to a point where they can afford what you do.
That's exactly right. That person back then didn't know that this is what she needed. Yeah.
Correct. But your whole issue now is you're going out into the world trying to convince that same person to basically bypass the road that you went on and be like, yes, you need to pay for this, but they're not in a conscious state to actually be ready for that.
That's quite profound, really, isn't it? That's quite, yeah. So the question is, of course, how do I do that?
So how do you do what?
How do I don't know. I mean, I guess essentially, how do I make an income with this? Yeah.
Well, how do I make an income? I think is a better question than how do I reach somebody who is unreachable?
Yeah.
Right. So here's a distinction that I would cause you to make is like, you have the skill elements of this question. So there's like the marketing, messaging, selling bit has to be aligned as far as, I got to know then, like I first and foremost, I got to get clarity on having the skill set that I have. Who is it that I can actually help, and what is it that I can actually help them with that can actually pay the money that I want? Right? Like that's the first question. Right? Then the second question is, what beliefs do I need to nurture the building of that skill set so that I can actually make the money that I want? And then if I want to provide resources that are probably free for who I was back then I have the choice to do that for free, because that's probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just, I'm going to have to sit with that for a while, I think, and just get my head around that.
Yeah, I know that was kind of a short path to get to like man, I have to change up everything that I'm doing. But that's kind of how these things work sometimes.
Yeah. I don't think I do have to change up everything I'm doing, because I still think the program itself is pretty solid and it will do the trick. But I definitely need to be talking to other people than who I'm talking to.
Yes, I would agree with you on that one.
Yeah. So I guess the next step is a bit more research on where the people I want to reach are, and just put the rest of it to the back of my mind for now, because I've got other things to do. And once I've got those things done, I can come back to these other people.
100%. I think tactically and strategically that is exactly where you're going to need to go down into. I think, and if you let me know if you want to go down this path or not, like as far as like this container is concerned, but I think the more important thing is like, why did I spend so much time, and what was my narrative in kind of keeping me rooted in this stuck place of trying to fix what was unfixable?
Yeah. And that, I think, is more rooted in my own issues about being comfortable where I am. And because, as I said before, depression and I are old frenemies. I don't know who I'd be without depression. So there's a part of me that has to make my life as hard as possible, because that's what I've been doing for 52 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And what better way to make it hard and to prove that right than to try and sell something to somebody that can't afford your services?
Yeah. It's obvious when you figure it out, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of one of those instances where it's like it's hard to see the building when you're on the balcony, right? And as soon as you step out and you can see the full thing, you see the full picture, right? So in this instance, right, like you're actually very good at proving your beliefs right. you're just doing it in an unconscious direction. Like you're doing a direction that's going to work against you because you probably haven't chosen it consciously. You just kind of let circumstance choose it for you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The psychologist part of my brain finds that fascinating. So I need to be working on, or I am going to be working on changing my beliefs around who I can help now. Don't think I need to change how I can help them, because I think that's still valid. So it's about who I can.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about what you do,
help.
it's like depression is depression, and you can navigate depression. So whether somebody's sitting in front of you that's in X position or Y position, it's just a matter of semantics and contextualizing it. But you know how to navigate the how. So yeah, I would agree with you on that.
So what's your advice around changing beliefs? I mean, I personally, the traditional senses, affirmations and all that kind of thing, whereas I struggle a bit with affirmations because I think my belief is stronger than my words, I guess.
I would agree with you. I would have, my experience, like I have nothing against affirmations. I think if they work for you, by all means do them. Hasn't really been something that's been too successful for me in my experience in my life and doing what I do. But I also don't think that they're necessary. So to answer your original question of like, how do I change beliefs? That is its own process that's going to go outside the scope of like, this container. So that's kind of the short answer. The little bit longer answer is I start from the premise, and the way that I approach my coaching as far as, installing new beliefs and self-belief and confidence and all those other pieces, like beliefs are just thoughts we keep thinking, right? It's kind of like the Esther Hicks definition. Like that's one that's worked the most for me. It's like, they're just thoughts we keep thinking. And I think the reason that they can be tricky is because the primal part of us that always goes first, that's hardwired to go first, that primal immediate self, if left unattended by our higher self, which while it doesn't go first, it has final say, it has veto power, right? When our primal self goes first, it hijacks, for the sake of efficiency, what was default. So what was default was the thought we thought yesterday, the thought we thought the moment before that kept us alive. We're just going to repeat it. And unless we take the moment to execute our higher functions and basically make the choice of like execute that power of choice to change it, it just keeps repeating. So like in your example right now, okay, so I thought I needed to save the person who I was, whatever many years ago. You prove that true every time because, either you didn't or you didn't have somebody like me point it out and be like, well, is that really true? Is that person really appropriate? Is that projection really the way that it needs to be? Even if it is true, is it serving? Like to ask all those questions, right? So it ended up being a belief of a thought you just kept thinking, and it was just causing you to operate in the way that you were operating. So that's kind of a bit of a longer, more macro view of like how I would do it. Now, how we would do it, like I said, that's kind of outside the scope of this. But does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay, perfect. So then just because, this is now kind of the beginning of the awareness and kind of leaving an open loop, I just want to be, as far as like this container of the podcast and our conversation, does this feel complete for you, or is there still something left outstanding?
Actually, no, that feels complete. I just kind of feel like I've got that. Let's do it. Yeah, because it's very obvious once it's pointed out to you. Oh, that's it. Yeah, just talking to the wrong people. And the interesting thing about that was I thought I had that sorted.
Well, it goes back to the belief thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the thought I kept thinking.
Yeah.
This is sorted, this is sorted, this is sorted. So why would I need to ever look at it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm looking at how do I change what I say to these people and I try one variation, another variation, third variation, maybe I just need to change my program. Right now I get into like doom loop depression. Like, is it really good enough? Do I, you know what I like? Now you're distracted, but really that like you're falsely distracted because it's a wrong problem. Like you're trying to
Mm,
solve a problem that's not really there.
mm, mm,
Right. Which is always why we say coaches need coaches, because the value of having that mirror is to point out like where the blind spots that I'm not looking. It's always
mm.
more beneficial than like, what am I doing? Because you can see the evidence of that around you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So in that case, to just close us off then, if you could just in your own words summarize, like, what are your biggest takeaways from our conversation today?
Biggest takeaways, or the biggest takeaway is I've been talking to the wrong person. I mean, that's in a nutshell. It's also one of the I don't know if takeaways is the right word, but every time I write, because I find one of the reasons I write is because I find I feel that I can't express myself clearly when I speak. Whereas when I write, it all makes sense in, a couple of sentences. So every time somebody asks me to explain what I do, it gets clearer. And I'm reminded more of, oh yeah, that's why that's important, because you lose track of your why, I think, sometimes, when you're in the midst of doing all this stuff. You always know your why, but you lose track of the passion behind it, I think, until somebody asks you to explain it again, and you start to feel rather than just start trying to express yourself, so I think that, I think, so to put that in a takeaway sense, keep talking. So those are the biggest, profoundest. I mean, I'm going to have to sit with it for a while, because actually, no, I'm not. I need to run with it more than sit with it, because it's quite clear what needs to be done. Go do it, Fiona. I feel quite emotional about this all, because it's just
That's okay. It happens. So by all means, let it all out if it needs to be let out.
And I've actually I've just had a death in the family in the last couple of days, so I mean, I'm kind of bordering on the emotional as it is. It's fabulous. So, I mean, wonderful. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and thank you for coming on and being vulnerable and diving into all of that. So I appreciate you for it. So then, just to close this off, let everybody know then how to find you, who's the best person to find you, where can they find you. That the floor is yours for all that.
Okay, so you can find me at thedepressionmuse.com. You can find me on most social media channels with the Depression Muse, Fiona Tate, which is Tate, or the Depression Muse. So Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, I'm around. You can also just email me. Sometimes you just want to go directly to the source. So you can email me at drusilla@thedepressionmuse.com.
Love it.
So I'm pretty easy to find. I've got various services that you'll find, on my offerings page on the website, and I'm more than happy to just chat. I mean, this is what I do.
Beautiful. So we will include all of those pieces in the show notes. So Fiona, thank you very much for being on. And for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.